Welcome back to Training Camp with Kolby Van Camp here on 99.9 The Rock. KWKR studios here in Garden City. Colin Wellhoff with me on the air today. Linkon Cure is coming to Kansas State, five-star tight end from Goodland, Kansas. In fact, we've seen him play out here. Linkon has played Goodland. They're both in 3A state football, and that's wow, what a time to be a Kansas State fan. To break that down, I've got Cole Carmody of GoPowerCat.com on the air with us here today. Cole, how are you doing? I appreciate you taking time out of your golf day to step by and jump on the air with us this afternoon.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys for having me. I just got done playing around, and I had to. Anytime we can talk about K-State football, especially K-State football recruiting and the major win that was Linkon Cure, man, I'm happy to do it because, wow, what a day it was yesterday for K-State fans, for that football program. That is a day that I think a lot of K-State fans will remember for a long time because one of the best recruiting wins in the history of K-State football.
Yeah, definitely one of the best recruiting wins in that it's the first five-star that Kansas State has ever acquired. And as of today in the modern recruiting era, he is the highest-rated recruit that Kansas State has secured. Could you just give us some insight into how significant Linkon Cure's commitment is for Kansas State football, especially considering his national ranking and the competition for his recruitment with other high-profile Division I schools?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to put it into context, right? Because I think when Avery Johnson committed, and maybe Dylan Edwards to a lesser extent, but especially Avery Johnson, when he committed to K-State, that was one of those things that felt like, wow, K-State's probably not going to have another one of these for a long time, right? We've seen really good players leave the state of Kansas and go on to play somewhere else. And so when that happens, I don't think folks are too surprised. Is it a disappointment that maybe they don't go to K-State? Sure. I think that it is for a lot of fans. But, when they got Avery Johnson, they're like, wow, we have arrived. And I personally didn't expect to see another athlete, another football player with the pedigree of Avery Johnson commit to K-State within the next 2 years. I mean, who would have thought that K-State would be getting a five-star caliber player after they landed Avery Johnson from the state of Kansas, from Goodland, Kansas, no less. And, it was just kind of one of those things that you feel like that the Avery Johnson commitment was a once-in-a-lifetime type of deal. And then here you are 2 years later with an even bigger recruitment. And I think it was so important not only from that aspect of the stars, but the fact that Collin Klein left, a guy who Linkon Cure was really close with. And not only did it not affect his recruitment, K-State basically had to start from scratch and say, hey, we're more than just one single coach, one single player. And that worked because Linkon Cure fell in love with Kansas State, so much so that, as he talked about in his interview, he silently committed on his visit. And it wasn't easy. Oregon was probably number one going into that official visit, but K-State did enough to wow him and earn the commitment. And I go back to this, Colby. Not very often do you see five-star players in the state of Kansas. So for K-State to keep him home, he is truly a generational talent.
Yeah, I agree that he is a generational talent. So many people have referred to him as a freak, just a freak athlete in the way that he's able to get into open space, the way he brings down contested balls, just everything that he's able to do as an athlete on the football field and then off of it, on the track, on the basketball court. Very impressive. And we'll get into some of that in our next segment after we're finished here with Cole. I've got some clips that we're going to play. But you mentioned it. The departure of Collin Klein seemed to briefly affect Cure's decision-making process. How did offensive coordinator Connor Riley and quarterbacks coach Matt Wells reassure Linkon and solidify his commitment in the post-Klein era?
I think, I know for a fact that Linkon Cure was Matt Wells' number one priority as soon as he took over as co-offensive coordinator. If you go back and you look at some of his social media, one of the very first photos he posted was him on a plane with Goodland, Kansas in the background. Coaches can't come out and say, hey, we want this kid, we want that kid. They really can't talk about the recruiting process, but they can put things out on social media. We've seen K-State coaches do that before. Well, Matt Wells did that in a major way, and I think another guy who was a major part of his recruitment was the aforementioned Avery Johnson. Linkon and Avery are tight, and Linkon and Dylan Edwards are also really tight. Dylan Edwards made a recruiting call to Linkon Cure this spring. He didn't have Dylan's number, so he's like, who the heck is FaceTiming me? Sure enough, it was Dylan Edwards basically relaying the message, hey, man, this is where you want to be. You don't want to go somewhere else because you're going to make the same mistake I did and realize that home was calling all along. And I feel like Dylan has come to that understanding that maybe he gained that year of experience. Would he have rather been at K-State? Yes. Now he's where he needs to be. That was the message from Dylan Edwards to Linkon Cure. Go where you're wanted, go where you're needed, go where you're going to be loved, and go where you're going to have the most success. So as big of a win as it was for Connor Riley and Matt Wells, I think Dylan Edwards and Avery Johnson deserve more of the credit than what they're receiving, because it was a lot of the players who really had the inside track in this recruitment.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because Kansas State is in a place culturally as a program that it's like, yeah, we have our coaches, we have our recruitment coordinators, we have the guys that are specifically paid to recruit people, but we're also going to sick our quarterback on you. We're going to put one of our running backs out there to talk to you. We're going to put out an offensive lineman. We're going to go find people in our position groups that make sense in relation to how they're going to work with you on the field to sell you on why you should be at Kansas State. That's huge. A lot of programs try to do that. I don't know how well they do that. And every time that we have a huge recruiting win as Kansas State fans, but then you look in at the program, Kansas State as a program seems to just be landing these guys, not only because of the effort that the coaches put in, but because of the personal touch from the players. And that's huge. And what is also huge is that Kansas State, they've been so successful in recruiting local talent. They have been since Bill Snyder. They were in Bill Snyder 2.0. Even in the Ron Prince era, they were still getting those kind of in-state guys. Now Chris Kleiman comes along. All we've heard forever: you can't recruit to Manhattan, Kansas. You can recruit to Manhattan, Kansas, and you can get some of these guys. And more importantly, when they're in their backyard, you have to go out and get them. And that's what Kansas State's doing. How does Cure fit in to the Wildcat strategy of building with in-state recruits like Martell Jackson, McGuire Richmond, and others as you look at this class of 2025?
I think, well, first of all, I think he is the kingpin when it comes to this class. They have been recruiting other guys, no doubt, but most of their effort has been focused on Linkon Cure. And I think when they're able to kind of add some of these guys from the lower ranks of the state, like you mentioned, McGuire, Richmond, and Martell Jackson, who wasn't even ranked by any recruiting services until he had a great showing at K-State camp and received an offer. They've been so focused on Cure that I think this is the guy. They said, okay, we have targeted our guy. We got our guy. Now we can focus on everybody else. And so even if K-State doesn't land any more in-state talents, which I'm not necessarily sure they will, especially anybody in the top 5, just with how it's broken down positionally, they have built their backbone for this class. They have their guy, and they will be able to expand. But as far as recruiting from in-state goes, I mean, this is huge. If you look at next year's class, another player out in your neck of the woods, Ian Premier from Great Bend. I mean, this is another tight end who is going into his junior season, who is a nationally ranked kind of guy. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'd have to imagine that there's a relationship that exists already between Linkon and Ian. And how cool would it be to see, if you're Ian from Great Bend, to see Linkon from Goodland, very similar type of towns, very similar type of, Western Kansas atmosphere, and culturally very similar, to then make that transition to Kansas State, and you play the same position. I think that if you want to look towards 2026, there's a lot of similarities between this class in 25 and that class in 26. And I think K-State is going to continue to try and piggyback on the success they had that started in the 23 class with Dylan and Avery.
What is it about these Kansas guys? They seem to come out of nowhere. Last year, Dylan Cure, when Kansas State offered him, was either a low star or a no star athlete. And then suddenly his ascension just took off. I mean, to the stratosphere, away it went. Now he's a 5-star. Kansas State's got him, or at least they have the verbal commitment. You don't want to say that they've got him until you've got the name on the dotted line. But you feel good that Kansas State is going to get this guy into the class of 2025 and get him signed on National Signing Day. But what is it about these Kansas guys? I see it out here in southwestern Kansas, Garden City, Scott City, Linkon, Sublette, Great Bend. They're all over the place where you're just find these diamonds in the rough. These guys that are just fantastic athletes that are able to come out and capitalize on their natural abilities, but then also on just the work ethic that they've been instilled in for all of their life coming out of southwestern Kansas, and just kind of Kansas in general. It just seems like a Kansas staple that you get these kind of lower to middle class in terms of the rankings guys that then propel off into the stratosphere or are then built up and recruited by programs like Kansas State? What is it about Kansas guys, in your opinion?
I think people are just now starting to realize that there are good athletes in the state. For the past 25, 30 years, we've consistently produced top end talent that has gone on to the next level. I mean, how many times do we see kids that get missed and have to go play at a Fort Hays State or have to go play at a Pittsburgh State? But wouldn't you know it, they're getting their tryout for the NFL. I know that there was several instances of that happening in the past, and now I think we're starting to realize and kids are starting to realize that the recruiting process is different now than it was. You can't just play high school football and expect to earn that Division I scholarship. You have to go test yourself. You have to go to these camps. I mean, if it weren't for the K-State camp, we would have had no idea about Martell Jackson. Now, I understand that he plays at Derby and it's a little bit different, but again, most of these kids, we find out about them because they go camp at these places. And so I think when you have that work ethic to succeed and you know the steps that it takes to get to your ultimate goal, now it's easier than ever to get to that ultimate goal. And teams are starting to realize, wow, there are some really good athletes out in Kansas, and we don't want to miss out on them. I mean, if you go look at the 25 rankings, Colby, Dawson Merritt out of Blue Valley is going to Alabama. Jaden Woods out of Mill Valley is going to Penn State. Linkon Cure, 5-star kids going to K-State. Andrew Babalola, uncommitted, probably going to end up in an SEC school. And so there is talent in this state. It has been long overlooked, but people are sleeping no more because they realize there are some really, really good football players that come out of our great state of Kansas.
100%. And you talk about with some of these high profile guys and Linkon Cure being one of them as the highest rated high school commit in K-State history in the modern recruiting era. How does this impact Kansas State's reputation and their ability to attract future top recruits? Because if there are any guys that are on the fence currently with this K-State recruiting class, I think you look at a Linkon Cure commitment and say, whoa, okay, they're pulling out the big guns. They're getting some of these top end guys that not just top end for the state of Kansas, top end for the nation. I mean, number 2 tight end in the nation. And now you're getting this guy. I want to go play with Linkon Cure. I want to go play with Avery Johnson and Linkon Cure and Dylan Edwards. Jeez, I mean, that backfield just becomes deeper and deeper and deeper and more nightmarish if you're a defensive coordinator in the Big 12. What does this say about Kansas State's ability to attract that kind of talent in the future now that they finally landed someone like Linkon Cure and just a couple years ago, somebody like Avery Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you look at it, K-State is the only Big 12 school right now to have secured the commitment of a 5-star athlete according to 24/7. And I'm pretty sure it's that way. So that's a pretty crazy stat. I think that I'm not sure if this impacts K-State maybe nationally like some fans might see. I would caution fans to think, oh, well, if we can get a 5-star, then we can go compete with any other program in the country to get a 5-star. I mean, it doesn't hurt when you have the 5-star in your backyard, right? You can't fault the K-State for going after the 5-star that's in their own backyard. You got to credit them for landing them. And so I think really what this does is it shows the teams that they're competing with on the recruiting trail, hey, you know what? We're going to be in these fights until it's over, right? And it doesn't matter. If we offer a kid, we are going to be in on it until it's over. We might not get them every time, but we are going to get some of them. And in this case, we are going to get some top-end talent. And I think if you're the K-State coaching staff, you have elevated yourself. Your floor is now higher. The ceiling has gone way up, but the floor has also gone way up in terms of recruiting. Those athletes that you felt like, oh, wow, this is a really good win for us. Those are the ones that you're consistently securing the commitments of, right? That they have elevated and graduated from the low tier to the mid to upper tier as the floor. And I think that's really exciting because in the 12-team playoff, the more talent that you can get, the more talent that you stack, the more depth you acquire, the greater chance you have of competing in this thing in the long haul.
So my final question for you, and I appreciate your time. You've been very gracious with it in the middle of your golf day. But Kansas State gets the class of 2025. Is this going to be, we said this a couple of years ago about Avery Johnson. It's the most star-studded class in Kansas State history. Look at these upper 3 stars, and you get this upper 4-star guy. Kansas State now is a 5-star. And depending on what recruiting service you're looking at, I know 24/7 Sports doesn't have them just quite there yet, but a couple of them do. Brock Heath out of Blue Valley Northwest is that 3, some say 4-star kind of guy. Adonis Moyes out of IMG Academy, he's that upper 3, lower 4-star kind of guy that probably by the end of this season, you'll probably see both of those guys transition into 4-stars. And before you know it, Kansas State in their recruiting profile, they have 1 5-star, they have a handful of 4-stars, and then they have a bunch of 3-stars. Whoa, that's one of the most significant recruiting classes I've seen in my lifetime, and I think most K-State fans have seen in their lifetime. Could you break that down for us? Am I in the right place of mind thinking that this could be a really special class, not just because of Linkon Cure, or am I out in left field there?
I don't necessarily think you're wrong. I think a lot of it has to do if you're just looking at it from a numbers standpoint. I can tell you right now, I absolutely love that. I think Brock Heath has a chance to be an early contributor on an interior line position. You bring up Adonis Moisey from IMG, excited about his potential. I think that, depends on the recruiting service you look at, but K-State's going to have a chance to end up with probably 3 or 4 4-star recruits by the time it's all said and done. And if you were to just look at it from a number standpoint, for sure. I think the way we feel about the 23 class is maybe a little different because a lot of those kids, the backbone of those kids, the core were from Kansas. Jordan Allen, Olathe South, Avery, obviously Mays, and shoot, you can throw Dylan in there from Derby now. The core of those kids were Kansas kids, and that's where most of the talent is coming from. I actually think it's more impressive that some of these high 3 and low 4-star kids are from out of state, because that probably says more about the program than what they did with the 23 class when the kids that were in state. But the bottom line is this, Kolby, when you can get a 5-star commitment, it doesn't matter if they are from Kansas City, if they're from New York, if they're from Goodland, or if they're from Mars. If they choose K-State, it's a win.
Okay. If they choose Kansas State, it doesn't matter where they're coming from. What was it that Michael Beasley said? We're gonna beat him in Manhattan. We're gonna beat him in Lawrence. We're gonna beat him in Africa, right? So if we're gonna recruit him in Manhattan, we're gonna recruit him in Lawrence. We're gonna recruit him in Goodland. We're gonna recruit him in New York. We're gonna go to Mars. We're gonna get some of these guys. I love it. I love the energy. Cole, I appreciate your time as always. It's been great to have you on the show. We'll have to do it again sometime soon, and we'll catch up at Big 12 Media Days. Sound good?
Sounds good, buddy. Thank you.